At Emmanuel Croydon, we exist to be a community drawn together by our desire to know and follow Jesus. We long to become disciples of Jesus who are equipped to serve him in the whole of life, transforming families, communities, and workplaces as we love God with heart, mind, soul, and strength. We hope you enjoy this week's talk from the morning services. Thank you for joining us today. Grace and peace to you.
Today's reading is Jeremiah 32, verses 1 to 27. Jeremiah buys a field. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord in the 10th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah, which was the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. The army of the king of Babylon was then besieging Jerusalem, and Jeremiah the prophet was confined in the courtyard of the guard in the royal palace of Judah. Now Zedekiah king of Judah had imprisoned him there, saying, "Why do you prophesy as you do? You say, 'This is what the Lord says, I am about to give this city into the hands of the king of Babylon, and he will capture it. Zedekiah king of Judah will not escape the Babylonians, but will certainly be given into the hands of the king of Babylon, and will speak with him face to face, and see him with his own eyes. He will take Zedekiah to Babylon, where he will remain until I deal with him, declares the Lord. If you fight against the Babylonians, you will not succeed." Jeremiah said, "The word of the Lord came to me. Hanamel, son of Shallum, your uncle, is going to come to you and say, 'Buy my field at Anathoth, because as nearest relative it is your right and duty to buy it.'" Then, just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the garden and said, "Buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. Since it is your right to redeem and possess it, buy it for yourself." I knew that this was the word of the Lord, so I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel, and weighed out for him 17 shekels of silver. I signed and sealed the deed, had it witnessed, and weighed out on silver on the scales. I took the deed of purchase, the sealed copy containing the terms and conditions, as well as the unsealed copy, and I gave this deed to Baruch, son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, in the presence of my cousin Hanamel, and of the witnesses who had signed the deed, and of all the Jews sitting in the courtyard of the guard. In their presence I gave Baruch these instructions. "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Take these documents, both the sealed and unsealed copies of the deed of purchase, and put them in a clay jar, so they will last a long time. For this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Houses, fields, and vineyards will again be bought in this land." After I have given the deed of purchase to Baruch, son of Neriah, I prayed to the Lord, "Ah, sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. You show love to thousands, but bring the punishment for the parents' sins into the laps of the children after them. Great and mighty God, whose name is the Lord Almighty, great are your purposes and mighty are your deeds. Your eyes are open to the ways of all mankind. You reward each person according to their conduct and as their deeds deserve. You performed signs and wonders in Egypt and have continued them to this day, in Israel and among all mankind, and have gained the renown that is still yours. You brought your people Israel out of Egypt with signs and wonders, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and with great terror. You give them this land you had sworn to give their ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey. They came in and took possession of it, but they did not obey you or follow your law. They did not do what you commanded them to do. So you brought all this disaster on them. See how the siege ramps are built to take the city. Because of the sword, famine, and plague, the city will be given into the hands of the Babylonians who are attacking it. What you said has happened, as you now see. And though the city will be given into the hands of the Babylonians, you, sovereign Lord, say to me, buy the field with silver and have the transaction witnessed. Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? Well, good morning, Emmanuel. You're getting this straight from the NHS front line as I'm at work about to start a day shift. Obviously, I'm very grateful to be able to get out of the house, but being in a hospital at the moment feels rather appropriate when talking about calamity and bleak times. Now, the calamity of disease has struck close to home for the church before. Back in the 7th century, a plague was running rife across Europe and in the British Isles. In the kingdom of Northumbria, in the relatively new monastery at Jarrow, death held sway. All that remained of those that made the monastery their home were two people. The abbot, named Ceolfrith, and a young boy under his tutelage. The boy was made to join in reciting the Psalter, and when the abbot could manage through his grief, they also managed to sing the antiphons that accompanied them, with just the two voices occupying a bleak and empty space. We know about this because the boy's name was Bede, who would go on to become one of England's greatest churchmen and historians. Author of, among other things, the ecclesiastical history of the English people, Bede was also a teacher and has inspired many generations of the followers of Jesus. Our church's history is a powerful reminder of many things. It builds a connection between worshippers now and those of many hundreds of years ago. It gives us a window into other times when we faced peril together, so we can seek insight, encouragement, and hope. Sometimes those visions of the past are visible and physical things that we might walk past daily, such as the marks made on London's churches during the Blitz of the Second World War. Other times, the lessons we get are found in the stories we have passed down to us, either in written form or through oral storytelling. Over the next few weeks, we'll be hearing the stories of the Jewish people as calamity unfolded. Defeat to external powers and exile from Jerusalem would have seemed like world-changing disasters to those on the losing side. If you believe that God dwells in a temple, and that temple now lies in ruins, you might think that your God was dead. If you believe that God would protect your people from defeat, then you're going to have to confront some very serious issues with what you think God is or was like. But there were good things to come out of the best part of a century in exile. It was in this period that the Jews learned that rather than being a deceased temple dweller, God was with them, and God was everywhere. During this time, the idea of the Messiah started to develop, and the concept of a new covenant was born. So, during the next few weeks, we'll be lamenting, as is right and healthy, but also prayerfully looking for some hope, and seeing what good we can see that will be with us on the other side. This week's story is taken from the book of Jeremiah. I don't know how well you know it, so I'll explain the story. Jeremiah was a Judean prophet from a period of history that could be best described as turbulent. As a young man of priestly stock, from a village called Anathoth, he was called by God to his service as a young man in 626 BC. Yes, by the way, it is apparently pronounced Anathoth, even though it sounds like Michael Palin would suggest it's where we were Leith Wodger to after telling us about his friend in woe. Jeremiah started prophesying during the rule of Josiah, the reforming Judean king, at a time when there was hope of a return to independence and former glories. The great Assyrian Empire was besieged from a multitude of directions, so its stranglehold over its vassal Judah was failing. Our prophet, though, didn't share the mood of nationalistic optimism. He saw that Judah's problems ran deeper than external powers and saw doom and destruction on the kingdom's horizon. During the reign of Jehoiakim, the third of 5 kings under which he served, Jeremiah started to doubt himself. Nobody was listening, and the predicted disaster hadn't happened. In fact, almost on the contrary, big civic building projects seemed to be pointing to a much brighter future. But Jeremiah was to be proved right. Having swallowed up Assyria, the region's new great power, Babylon, its conquest of Judah followed, with Nebuchadnezzar capturing Jerusalem in 597, after which he installed the weak Zedekiah as a new king. Even in defeat, the people of Jerusalem thought they were being protected by God, as their fate hadn't been exile like their northern neighbours in Israel had faced at the hands of the Assyrians. Once again, Jeremiah prophesied destruction, but was again ignored. Instead of following Jeremiah's instruction to accept Babylonian rule in the short term, Zedekiah followed other advisers, and under the encouragement of Egypt, rebelled against the Babylonians. They stood no chance and were no match for them. Jerusalem once again fell after an 18-month siege. Except this time, there was no clemency. All of the principal buildings in Jerusalem were destroyed, including the temple where God was believed to reside. Zedekiah, the king, saw his family murdered, was himself blinded, and along with the other senior and important Judeans, taken into exile. But even as the armies of Babylon were closing in, Jeremiah received a vision and saw something to hope for. He bought some land in his home village of Anathoth, which was only 4 miles away from Jerusalem. What a waste of money, you might think. But into this situation, Jeremiah preached of a better tomorrow, a return from exile and future prosperity, a time when the land would be well used by their descendants. Jeremiah prophesied of a new covenant between God and his people, where everyone from the greatest to the least would know God, a God who promised to put his law in their minds and write it on their hearts. Far from believing that it was all over for the Jewish people, Jeremiah thinks the best is yet to come. And that land he's bought is just preparing for the future. Although the terrifying spread of a disease hasn't really affected most of us during our lifetimes, it has affected the church before on several occasions, often with catastrophic results. Churches continued to meet together during the Black Death of the 14th century, with presumably disastrous consequences, and the loss of a third of the population of England caused a crisis of faith for many, even those employed within the church. Alongside that terror, though, are stories of goodness. Priests visiting the sick as they died, knowing full well they were placing themselves in harm's way to serve others. During the Black Death, priests died at a significantly higher rate than normal people, serving God at great self-cost. Experience tells us that though God can bring comfort in times of trouble, sometimes God feels rather quiet when things are at their very worst. Living through times like these can remind us all too painfully that a prayer and ritual might bring us peace rather than a rescue. Many a Christian has occupied or prayed for someone in an ITU bed over the past few weeks. So why did Jeremiah buy a field when times were that grim? The act achieved 2 things. Firstly, it was to, as a prophet, minister to those around him, to encourage them that all was not lost, that God had not given up on them. Remember, he did it in front of all the Jews who were part of the royal guard at the time. And secondly, he was proactively planning for the good times ahead, to plant a seed, if not a literal one, that would come to fruition at some point in the future. So what does buying a field mean today? Well, first, the ministry bit. Some of what we do in our church's ministry will be encouraging hope, expressing genuine belief that there are better times ahead. And when it all comes down to it, that God is in charge, not sadness or death. Some of what we do will be mourning with people. Where health and lives are lost, this involves being as present as possible and sharing in grief. In today's rather unusual circumstances, we may be talking about a removal of the freedom to do whatever someone wants to do. For some of the old and vulnerable, this may mark the end of the great and free way of life that we've lived. As COVID-19 lingers on, we should particularly remember and have time for those for whom this change may be permanent. If we remember Job, though, we must be mindful not to be like his friends, attempting to seek meaning in suffering and see purpose where none might exist. Our job may be to simply support and, where possible, share burdens and mourn alongside. Having spent time with suffering patients these past few weeks, I'm greatly encouraged by the ministry of the chaplains and ordinary staff as well to those on the wrong end of this virus. Where it's not been possible to be there in person, technology such as iPads have allowed carers to minister to sick people and their families, even at the last. In the case of our chaplains in particular, they follow in the same footsteps, if much less risky, as their predecessors during the Black Death, while seeking no recompense. And for me, that's fantastic ministry. The second part, which perhaps a lot of us haven't thought of yet, is that planning for the future. And that's not to say, buy stocks now, they'll go up in value. That's talking about working out where future joy and goodness is to be found. It's no coincidence that there was a rush on garden centres in the run-up to lockdown. And there were 2 questions in last week's virtual Prime Minister's questions on when garden centres would reopen. We want things that we can put in the ground, look after, watch grow, and enjoy coming to fruition. So I think we know we need to plan for the post-corona future, but many of us haven't got our heads around it yet. I still haven't given up on getting to my Greek holiday this summer, so I'm not sure I'm 100% ready to think like this either. But we probably need to realise that this coronavirus will be with us for a while. Medics are still talking about a 60-week plan. So what we do now will end up being with us long afterwards. Now, someone in our church might be like a chap called Rahir, who, after recovering from serious illness in Italy, opened a priory and a hospital in Smithfields. Now, St Bartholomew's Hospital has been saving lives and treating people on that site for just under 900 years. I was fortunate enough to be part of that history, training and working there many years ago. If you can be like Rahir, brilliant. Build something good that will last longer than pretty much anything else in London. But do you know what? I suspect most of us will be building with smaller, more subtle things. It will become increasingly easy to neglect people we know as social distancing continues. We have to invest in our friendships and our relationships now, knowing that they will come out of the other side of this feeling more valued. I don't know about you, but there's a few people I can't wait to give a hug to when all this is over. And you know what? I hate hugs. If we don't put in the effort now, though, what's there afterwards might not be as strong or as valuable. Whether it means Zoom calling regularly, delivering food to someone more vulnerable than ourselves, or even ordering someone we like a pizza to cheer them up, it'll be worth it. As a church, it'll be particularly easy to forget those who we wouldn't normally socialise and spend time with. Those who might be a bit more on the margins of our community. If you want to do one small thing for no money this week, either pick up the phone to or send a card to someone from church who might be missing seeing everyone. We need to buy into it now, this idea, so that we've invested in the sort of church we want to be when we're together again. And please don't forget those we don't see at all. Our food banks or our charities may need our generosity now more than ever for those of us that can afford it. Like with this other stuff, we're investing now to see the society we want to be when this is over. So even on lockdown, there's plenty still to do. Take encouragement from Jeremiah's hope for the future in terrible times. Let's live proactively in anticipation of those good times arriving. And if you're lucky, they'll reopen the garden centres soon too.
Thanks for listening to the Emmanuel Croydon podcast. For more information about our church and everything we have going on, visit our website, emmanuelcroydon.org.uk. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram to see and hear what's going on in the life of our church. God bless you and have a wonderful week.